Now, speaking of callbacks and function types, there it works pretty much in the same way. Let's say we have a new function up there, add and handle, let's say. And there we expect to get two numbers. And then I also want to get a callback function here, so a function which is passed in as an argument that should do something with the result. Then here we could generate the result, of course. But now I'm not returning it, but instead I want to call the callback function and pass in result. Now for that I want to be really clear that callback should be a function. So again, I'm using that function type definition that maybe does not return anything, but that does take a number as an argument because we're passing in a number here. So the callback function, the function we're passing into this function as a parameter, should accept a number. And now down there we could call add and handle, pass in 10 and 20, and then pass in a function, for example, an anonymous function here. So now here when we call the function, this is of course not a function type, but a concrete value we're passing in for this third argument. So this now here is an anonymous function I'm creating here. And there we know we'll get a number, maybe name it result here, and then we can do with it whatever we want. And now if we compile this, we see this log down there, 30, which is the result of our callback function, which we pass to add and handle, where add and handle combines the two numbers and then calls the callback, where the callback has to meet this condition here. The advantage of us defining the callback function definition here is that inside of the function we pass in as a callback, TypeScript is able to infer that result will be a number, and hence we could do anything with result here, what we could do with a number, without explicitly stating the type here. Because TypeScript knows result will be a number, because we made it really clear that the callback will get one argument, which is a number. Hence, also if we would expect a second argument here in the callback, we'd get an error, because we know, well, the callback we expect in our add and handle function only should have one argument. So if we then pass in a callback function which takes a second argument, that clearly is a mistake. The only thing TypeScript does not pick up is if we return something here. If I return result, then the callback does return something, even though we made it clear that it shouldn't return anything. This, however, is not a mistake or a bug in TypeScript. It actually happens on purpose. By specifying void here on our callback type, we're essentially saying we'll ignore any result you might be returning here. So we're basically saying in add and handle, where we get that callback function, will not do anything with the return type. That's why you'll be able to return something here without punishment, but you know, because it's clearly defined here on the callback type, that the callback will not do anything with the value you might return here. So that add and handle inside of the function will not do anything with that value you might be returning. And that's of course a useful piece of information. You might expect that in here we're doing something with the value returned by the callback. And by specifying this type here, we make it really clear that inside of add and handle, we're not interested in any return value. So this does not force you to pass in a callback that does not return anything. It just tells you that anything you might return will not be used. For the parameters, it's of course different. There, this is enforced, because here it really matters that you know if you're passing a callback that expects more parameters, well, then you'll get an error or you'll not get the result you want because I only give you one result. So there we can't just ignore what you might want, as it's the case for the return type. We can ignore that here. For passing something in, the add and handle function is responsible for that because that's where the callback gets called. This is why parameters are enforced, and TypeScript is really strict regarding the number and type of parameters of callback functions, and why it doesn't really care about the return type.